Picture this: you're sitting in a corporate boardroom, surrounded by powerful executives who think they know exactly who you are based on your appearance. They see a young woman in uniform and assume she's just another service member they can push around. What they don't know is that the person sitting across from them has survived some of the most brutal training on Earth, has operated in war zones where split-second decisions mean life or death, and carries skills that most people only see in movies. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose quiet confidence masked years of extraordinary service, and how one moment of corporate arrogance revealed the true meaning of strength, respect, and the price of underestimating someone based on their gender. What happened next would not only shock everyone in that room but would also expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military contracting, forcing Sarah to use every skill she'd learned as a Navy SEAL to protect not just her own reputation, but national security itself. Some stories are about ordinary people rising to extraordinary circumstances. This is about an extraordinary person navigating a world that refuses to see her true value until it's almost too late. Sarah Mitchell never planned to become a Navy SEAL. Growing up in a small farming town in Nebraska, she was the kind of girl who helped her father fix tractors and could outrun most of the boys in her high school cross-country team. Her mother, a nurse, instilled in her a deep sense of service, while her father, a Vietnam veteran, taught her that true strength came not from avoiding challenges but from facing them head-on. The military wasn't even on her radar until her senior year of high school, when a Marine recruiter visited her school. Sarah listened politely but wasn't particularly interested until the recruiter made an offhand comment that caught her attention. He mentioned that certain special operations programs were still working on integrating women, implying it might never really happen because of the physical and mental demands involved. That night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about those words. She researched everything she could find about special operations, particularly the Navy SEALs. The more she read about the impossible standards, the grueling training, and the exclusive brotherhood, the more determined she became. It wasn't about proving the recruiter wrong, it was about proving something to herself. After high school, Sarah enlisted in the Navy with one goal in mind. She spent her first 2 years excelling in every physical and academic challenge thrown her way. Her instructors noticed her immediately, not just for her performance but for her composure under pressure. While other sailors might panic during emergency drills, Sarah remained calm, processing information quickly and making decisions with a confidence that seemed beyond her years. When the opportunity finally came for women to attempt SEAL training, Sarah was among the first to volunteer. The reaction from her male counterparts ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Many believed the standards would be lowered to accommodate women, a prospect that insulted their sense of earned brotherhood. Sarah understood their concerns and shared them. She didn't want special treatment, she wanted to earn her place through the same crucible that had forged every SEAL before her. Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL training, known as BUD/S, began with Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. Sarah had prepared for this mentally and physically for 2 years, but nothing could truly prepare anyone for the reality. The instructors pushed every candidate beyond what they believed were their limits, using cold water, heavy boats, endless running, and constant psychological pressure to break down those who weren't completely committed. By the second day, Sarah was one of only 3 women remaining out of the original 12 who had started. The men were dropping out too, but the scrutiny on the women was intense. Every stumble was noticed, every moment of fatigue was examined for signs of weakness. Sarah learned to compartmentalize not just the physical pain but the additional pressure of representing all women in the eyes of those who wanted her to fail. The turning point came during surf torture, when candidates had to lie in the cold Pacific Ocean waves for hours while instructors shouted instructions and insults. Hypothermia was a real danger, and several candidates had already been pulled out for medical reasons. Sarah felt her body starting to shut down, her core temperature dropping to dangerous levels, when she noticed the man next to her beginning to lose consciousness. Without hesitation, she shifted position to help support him, sharing what little body heat she had left while keeping him alert enough to avoid being pulled from training. When the instructors finally called them out of the water, the man she'd helped was able to continue. That act of selflessness under extreme duress didn't go unnoticed by the training staff or her fellow candidates. From that moment forward, Sarah wasn't just tolerated by her classmates, she was respected. They began to see her not as a woman trying to prove she could hang with the men, but as a teammate willing to sacrifice for others even when she was barely hanging on herself. This shift in perception was crucial, because SEAL teams operate on absolute trust and mutual support. The rest of BUD/S was a blur of obstacle courses, long-distance swims, weapons training, and tactical exercises. Sarah excelled in marksmanship and underwater operations, showing a natural ability to remain calm and focused even when oxygen-deprived or under extreme stress. She struggled more with some of the pure strength requirements but compensated with technique and determination. The psychological evaluations were perhaps the most challenging aspect for Sarah. Military psychologists probed every aspect of her mental state, looking for any sign that she might break under the unique pressures of special operations. They were particularly interested in how she handled being one of the only women in an intensely masculine environment, whether she felt the need to prove herself constantly, and how she dealt with the reality that some people would never fully accept her presence. Sarah's responses were thoughtful and honest. She acknowledged the additional pressures but explained that her motivation came from personal standards rather than external validation. She wanted to serve at the highest level possible, and if that meant enduring skepticism and proving herself repeatedly, she was prepared for that reality. Training continued with advanced courses in combat tactics, foreign languages, cultural awareness, and specialized skills like explosives handling and advanced medical training. Sarah discovered she had a particular aptitude for intelligence gathering and analysis, able to process complex information quickly and identify patterns that others might miss. Her first deployment came 18 months after completing training. The team was initially hesitant about having her on operational missions, not because they doubted her skills, but because they weren't sure how local populations would react to an American woman in combat gear. Some cultures would see her presence as either a sign of disrespect or weakness, while others might actually find it less threatening than an all-male team. The mission was in Afghanistan, where Sarah's team was tasked with gathering intelligence on a high-value target suspected of coordinating attacks on coalition forces. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch during meetings with local informants while also analyzing communications intercepts for actionable intelligence. During their third week in country, Sarah's language skills and cultural training proved invaluable when their primary informant was killed and they had to quickly establish contact with his widow. In that conservative culture, the woman would only speak to another woman, and Sarah's presence meant the mission could continue rather than being scrubbed. The intelligence they gathered from that conversation led to a successful raid that captured not just their original target but uncovered a broader network of insurgent operations. Sarah's contribution was noted in her performance evaluation, but, more importantly, it solidified her position within her team. She had proven that her unique perspective and skills weren't just valuable in training scenarios but in real-world operations. Over the next 4 years, Sarah deployed 6 times to various locations around the world. She participated in hostage rescues, reconnaissance missions, and direct action raids. Her teammates learned to rely on her judgment and skills, particularly in situations that required patience and detailed analysis rather than overwhelming force. Despite her success, Sarah was always aware of the microscope she lived under. Every mission was an opportunity for critics to claim women weren't suited for special operations, while supporters held her up as proof that integration was working. The pressure to be perfect was constant, but Sarah had learned during BUD/S to focus on the mission rather than the politics surrounding her presence. As her military career progressed, Sarah began to think about life after the Navy. Special operations took a toll on everyone, physically and mentally, and she knew she couldn't deploy indefinitely. She started taking college courses during downtime, earning a degree in international business with a focus on security consulting. The transition from active duty to civilian life is difficult for any veteran, but, for someone with Sarah's background, it presented unique challenges. Her skills were highly specialized, and her security clearance made her valuable to defense contractors, but she wanted to find work that felt meaningful rather than just lucrative. When a position opened with Titan Defense Solutions, a company that provided security consulting for international corporations, Sarah saw an opportunity to use her experience in a new context. The job would involve assessing security risks for American companies operating in unstable regions, something that perfectly matched her background in intelligence and operations. The interview process was thorough, involving multiple background checks and conversations with former military colleagues. Sarah's references were impeccable, and her combination of operational experience and business education made her an ideal candidate. She was hired as a senior security consultant with the understanding that she would eventually lead her own team. For the first year at Titan Defense Solutions, Sarah worked primarily on risk assessments and security protocol development. She traveled to facilities in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, evaluating everything from physical security measures to personnel screening procedures. Her military experience gave her insights that typical security consultants couldn't provide, particularly when it came to understanding how adversaries might think and operate. Sarah's reputation within the company grew quickly. Clients specifically requested her expertise, and her reports were known for being thorough, accurate, and actionable. She had found a way to continue serving her country's interests while building a successful civilian career. Everything changed when Titan Defense Solutions was awarded a major contract with the Department of Defense to provide security assessments for military installations worldwide. It was the kind of high-profile, high-security project that could establish the company as a major player in the defense contracting world. Sarah was chosen to lead the team responsible for the initial assessment of 3 critical facilities. The project seemed straightforward until Sarah began reviewing the classified briefing materials. Something didn't feel right about the scope of work they were being asked to perform. The level of detail they were being asked to gather went far beyond what would be necessary for a security assessment and included information that could be valuable to foreign intelligence services. Sarah's concerns deepened when she realized that some of the other team members assigned to the project had questionable backgrounds. While their security clearances were valid, their previous work experience included contracts with companies that had been investigated for potential security breaches. It was possible that these were coincidences, but Sarah's training had taught her to pay attention to patterns and trust her instincts. When she raised her concerns with her immediate supervisor, she was told that the client requirements were non-negotiable and that questioning the scope of work could jeopardize not just the contract but the company's future relationship with the Department of Defense. Sarah was advised to focus on her assigned tasks and let management handle the broader strategic concerns. This response troubled Sarah more than her initial concerns about the project. In her military experience, questioning suspicious orders was not just acceptable but expected. The culture at Titan Defense Solutions seemed to prioritize profits and client relationships over security considerations, which was exactly the opposite of everything she had been trained to value. Sarah decided to conduct her own informal investigation into the company's other projects and clients. What she discovered was a pattern of contracts that, while individually legitimate, collectively provided access to an enormous amount of sensitive information about American military capabilities, personnel, and facilities. Someone with access to all of these contracts could piece together a comprehensive picture of national security vulnerabilities. The more Sarah dug into the company's operations, the more concerned she became. She discovered shell companies, offshore accounts, and a web of relationships that suggested Titan Defense Solutions might be more than just an opportunistic defense contractor. The evidence pointed towards something much more serious, possibly involving foreign intelligence services. Sarah found herself facing a dilemma that would test everything she believed about duty, loyalty, and moral courage. She had sworn an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but she was now a civilian employee whose primary obligation was to her company. Exposing her suspicions could destroy her career and possibly land her in legal trouble if she was wrong, but staying silent could potentially compromise national security if she was right. The decision of what to do next would ultimately determine not just Sarah's future but would test whether the values and training that had made her a Navy SEAL could guide her through the murky waters of civilian life, where the lines between right and wrong were often blurred by money, politics, and competing loyalties. Walking into the gleaming offices of Titan Defense Solutions every morning, Sarah felt like she was entering a different kind of battlefield. The marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows were a far cry from the desert compounds and mountain hideouts where she'd spent much of the previous decade, but the underlying tension was familiar. Here, instead of improvised explosive devices and sniper fire, the dangers were subtler but potentially just as deadly: corporate espionage, blackmail, and the slow corruption of institutions meant to protect American interests. 3 months into the Department of Defense contract, Sarah had compiled a disturbing picture of what she believed was happening at Titan Defense Solutions. The company wasn't just collecting information for legitimate security assessments, they were systematically gathering intelligence that could be incredibly valuable to foreign adversaries. The scope was breathtaking in its ambition and terrifying in its implications. Sarah's investigation had revealed that over the past 5 years, Titan Defense Solutions had won contracts that gave them access to virtually every aspect of American military operations overseas. They had conducted security assessments at bases in Germany, South Korea, and Japan. They had reviewed personnel security procedures for Special Operations Command. They had even been contracted to assess cybersecurity vulnerabilities at facilities that housed some of America's most sensitive military technologies. Individually, each contract was defensible and appeared to serve legitimate security purposes. Collectively, they represented a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation that any foreign government would pay billions to obtain. Sarah's military training had taught her to look for patterns, and the pattern here was unmistakable. Someone was using Titan Defense Solutions to systematically map American military capabilities and vulnerabilities. The challenge was proving it. Sarah had access to information about her own projects and could piece together some connections from public records and industry publications, but she couldn't access the classified details of other contracts without raising suspicions. She needed help, but she wasn't sure who she could trust. Her first instinct was to contact her former SEAL team leader, Commander Mark Rodriguez, who now worked at the Pentagon in a position that involved oversight of defense contractors. Sarah and Rodriguez had a relationship built on mutual respect and shared combat experience, and she trusted his judgment completely. The problem was that any contact with him would have to be carefully planned to avoid detection by Titan's security monitoring. Defense contractors were required to maintain strict security protocols, which included monitoring employee communications for potential security breaches. Sarah knew that her phone calls and emails were likely being recorded and analyzed, not necessarily because she was suspected of anything, but as standard operating procedure for someone with her level of security clearance working on classified projects. Sarah decided to use her upcoming vacation time to visit Washington, D.C., where she could meet with Rodriguez in person without creating any electronic trail that might alert Titan's security team. She told her supervisor that she was visiting family, which was technically true since her sister lived in nearby Virginia, and booked a flight for the following weekend. The meeting with Rodriguez took place at a small coffee shop near the Vietnam Memorial, a location that seemed appropriately symbolic given what Sarah was about to reveal. Rodriguez listened quietly as Sarah laid out her concerns, occasionally asking questions but mostly allowing her to present her evidence methodically. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring out at the memorial while processing what she had told him. Rodriguez's response was both validating and terrifying. He revealed that there had been growing concerns within the intelligence community about information leaks related to defense contractors, but investigators hadn't been able to identify the source. Several recent security breaches had involved information that could only have come from someone with access to multiple classified contracts, but the investigation had focused on individual employees rather than systemic issues with specific companies. Sarah's information provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Titan Defense Solutions hadn't been on investigators' radar because the company's individual contracts appeared legitimate and their security protocols met all regulatory requirements. The genius of the operation was that it looked exactly like a successful defense contracting business, because that's essentially what it was, except that the real client wasn't the US government but a foreign intelligence service. Rodriguez explained that Sarah's suspicions aligned with intelligence reports suggesting that a hostile foreign government had been developing a long-term strategy to penetrate American defense contracting. Rather than trying to hack individual systems or recruit individual assets, they had apparently decided to create or co-opt an entire company that could legally obtain the information they needed. The conversation with Rodriguez crystallized the magnitude of what Sarah had discovered, but it also highlighted the complexity of the situation she now found herself in. Rodriguez couldn't simply take her information and launch an official investigation without concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Titan Defense Solutions had been carefully constructed to appear completely legitimate, and any premature investigation could alert the perpetrators and cause them to destroy evidence or shut down the operation before investigators could fully understand its scope. Rodriguez proposed a plan that would require Sarah to continue working at Titan while secretly gathering evidence for a federal investigation. It was dangerous, not just because of the potential legal consequences if she was discovered, but because the people running the operation had demonstrated sophisticated planning and resources. If they suspected Sarah was onto them, her safety could be at risk. Sarah accepted the assignment without hesitation. This was exactly the kind of mission she had trained for as a SEAL: high stakes, significant personal risk, and vital to national security. The skills she had developed in gathering intelligence in hostile environments were directly applicable, even if the environment was a corporate office rather than a foreign battlefield. Over the next several months, Sarah carefully expanded her access to information within Titan Defense Solutions. She volunteered for additional projects, attended company meetings outside her normal scope of responsibility, and cultivated relationships with colleagues who worked on other contracts. She was careful not to appear overly curious or to access information too quickly, which might trigger security protocols. Sarah's military training served her well in this corporate espionage role. She had learned in special operations that successful intelligence gathering required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to maintain cover under pressure. She applied these same principles to her work at Titan, gradually building a comprehensive picture of the company's true operations. The evidence Sarah gathered was damning. She discovered that several key employees, including some in senior management positions, had previous connections to foreign governments through consulting work or academic relationships. Financial records showed payments from shell companies that could be traced to foreign intelligence services. Most significantly, she found that information gathered under government contracts was being systematically copied and transmitted to external servers located in countries known for their intelligence operations against the United States. Perhaps most disturbing, Sarah discovered that Titan Defense Solutions was actively recruiting former military personnel with high-level security clearances, particularly those with financial problems or personal issues that might make them vulnerable to coercion. The company offered attractive salaries and benefits that were difficult for struggling veterans to refuse, creating a pool of employees with access to classified information who might be more willing to bend rules or look the other way when they encountered suspicious activities. Sarah realized that she had been recruited for similar reasons, though in her case, the goal was probably to use her reputation and military credentials to legitimize the company's operations. Having a decorated Navy SEAL on staff provided credibility that helped Titan win additional contracts and deflected potential scrutiny from government oversight agencies. As Sarah's investigation progressed, she became increasingly concerned about her own safety. She noticed that she was being watched more closely by company security, and her access to certain areas of the building was restricted without explanation. Her computer activities were being monitored more intensively, and she suspected that her personal communications were also under surveillance. The pressure of maintaining her cover while gathering evidence was taking a psychological toll. Sarah had operated in combat zones where the dangers were immediate and obvious, but this kind of prolonged deception in a seemingly normal environment was more challenging. She had to constantly monitor her behavior to avoid raising suspicions while processing information that revealed the scope of the threat to national security. Sarah's relationship with her colleagues became increasingly complicated as she realized that some of them were likely unwitting participants in the espionage operation while others were actively complicit. She found herself analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings and questioning the motives behind every friendly gesture. The paranoia that was necessary for her mission began to affect her ability to form normal human connections. The situation came to a head when Sarah was assigned to a new project that would give her access to information about Special Operations Command personnel and facilities. This was clearly an attempt to use her military background and security clearance to obtain intelligence that would be particularly valuable to foreign adversaries. Sarah realized that continuing the assignment would require her to potentially compromise the safety of her former teammates and other special operations personnel. Sarah contacted Rodriguez through their established secure communication protocol to inform him that the situation was escalating beyond her ability to handle safely. The evidence she had gathered was substantial enough to support a federal investigation, but continuing to operate undercover was becoming too dangerous both for her personally and for the classified information she was being asked to access. Rodriguez agreed that it was time to extract Sarah from her undercover role and move forward with the investigation. However, he warned her that the transition would be dangerous. Once she stopped providing information or tried to leave Titan Defense Solutions, the company's leadership would likely realize that their operation had been compromised. They would almost certainly try to destroy evidence and might take action against Sarah to prevent her from testifying. The plan Rodriguez developed required Sarah to continue working normally for 2 more weeks while federal investigators finalized their preparation for a coordinated operation that would involve simultaneous raids on Titan's offices, server facilities, and the homes of key personnel. Sarah would be extracted under the pretext of a family emergency that required her immediate departure from the company. During those final 2 weeks, Sarah felt like she was walking through a minefield. Every interaction with her colleagues carried the potential for discovery, and she was increasingly certain that some of them suspected she wasn't who she appeared to be. The stress of maintaining her cover while knowing that she was sitting on information that could prevent serious damage to national security was almost unbearable. The breaking point came when Sarah was called into an unexpected meeting with senior management, including company CEO David Chen and several other executives she had rarely interacted with directly. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the company's executive conference room, and Sarah was told only that they wanted to discuss her future role in upcoming projects. As Sarah walked toward the conference room, her SEAL training kicked in automatically. She assessed potential escape routes, noted the positions of security personnel, and prepared mentally for whatever confrontation might be waiting for her. She had operated in enough dangerous situations to recognize when something felt wrong, and everything about this meeting triggered her survival instincts. The executive conference room at Titan Defense Solutions was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, while the massive mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Today, however, only 5 chairs were occupied. Sarah sat at one end, facing CEO David Chen, Chief Operating Officer Margaret Walsh, Human Resources Director James Morrison, and Security Chief Robert Kane. The meeting had been called ostensibly to discuss Sarah's role in upcoming projects, but the atmosphere in the room felt more like an interrogation than a career development conversation. Sarah's military training had taught her to read body language and environmental cues, and everything about this situation suggested she was walking into a trap. Chen opened the meeting with what appeared to be routine pleasantries, asking about Sarah's recent projects and expressing satisfaction with her performance. But his questions were more detailed than necessary, probing for information about her communication with clients and her access to specific classified materials. Sarah answered carefully, providing enough detail to appear cooperative while avoiding anything that might reveal the true scope of her knowledge about the company's operations. The conversation shifted when Walsh began asking about Sarah's background and qualifications, questions that seemed odd given that she had been with the company for over a year and had already been thoroughly vetted during the hiring process. Walsh wanted to know about Sarah's military service in unusual detail, particularly her special operations experience and the specific missions she had been involved in. Sarah realized that they weren't asking these questions to learn about her background, they were testing her responses against information they already possessed. Someone had been conducting a detailed investigation into her history, possibly including accessing classified military records that should have been beyond the reach of a civilian defense contractor. The atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense as Morrison began discussing company security protocols and the importance of employee loyalty. He emphasized that defense contractors faced unique challenges in maintaining security and that any breach of trust could have serious consequences not just for the company but for national security. His words seemed to carry an implicit threat, suggesting that Sarah's continued employment and possibly her freedom depended on her willingness to remain silent about anything she might have observed. Kane, the security chief, had been silent throughout most of the meeting, but now he leaned forward and began asking specific questions about Sarah's recent activities. He wanted to know about her trip to Washington, D.C., her meetings with former military colleagues, and her access to company files outside her normal scope of responsibility. It became clear that Sarah's activities had been under surveillance for some time and that her cover had likely been blown. Sarah's SEAL training had prepared her for situations like this, where maintaining composure under interrogation could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She responded to each question calmly and directly, neither confirming nor denying the implications behind Kane's queries. She explained her Washington trip as personal time with family and characterized her meetings with former colleagues as social rather than professional. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when Chen suddenly changed tactics and began speaking about the complexities of international business and the need for American companies to maintain relationships with foreign partners to remain competitive. His comments seemed to be a veiled justification for the very activities that Sarah suspected the company of engaging in. Chen explained that Titan Defense Solutions was part of a larger network of companies that facilitated legitimate business relationships between American corporations and foreign governments. He suggested that some of their activities might appear suspicious to outsiders who didn't understand the full context of international business development. His words seemed designed to test whether Sarah would express concerns about company activities or would indicate that she understood and accepted the true nature of their operations. Sarah realized that she was being offered an opportunity to join the conspiracy knowingly rather than being eliminated as a threat. The executives had apparently decided that her military background and security clearance made her too valuable to simply dismiss, but they needed to know whether she could be trusted with the truth about their operations. Walsh made the offer explicit by discussing Sarah's career advancement opportunities within the company and the potential for significant financial rewards for employees who demonstrated exceptional loyalty and discretion. She mentioned specific salary figures and benefit packages that were far beyond what Sarah could expect in a legitimate defense contracting position, making it clear that these rewards would come with expectations of silence and cooperation. The moment that would define everything came when Kane stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, removing a folder that contained what appeared to be surveillance photos and documents related to Sarah's investigation. He placed the folder on the table in front of her and said, "We know you've been asking questions about company operations. We also know you've been in contact with federal investigators." Kane's revelation confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Her cover had been completely blown, and the company leadership was fully aware of her investigation. The folder contained evidence of her meetings with Rodriguez, copies of her computer searches, and detailed records of her communications with federal investigators. Titan's security apparatus was far more sophisticated than she had realized. Chen leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah's reaction carefully. "The question now," he said, "is whether you're going to continue to be a problem for us, or whether you're going to recognize that you've stumbled into something much bigger than you understand." Sarah understood that this was the moment she had been trained for throughout her military career. Everything she had learned about duty, honor, and courage was being tested in a sterile corporate conference room rather than on a foreign battlefield, but the stakes were just as high. Her response would determine not just her own fate but potentially the success or failure of a federal investigation that could prevent serious damage to national security. Morrison pulled out another document and slid it across the table to Sarah. "This is a resignation letter that we've prepared for you," he said. "It indicates that you've decided to leave Titan Defense Solutions for personal reasons and that you have no concerns about company operations or security practices. Your signature on this document would resolve any misunderstandings and allow you to leave with excellent references and a generous severance package." The resignation letter was accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement that would legally prevent Sarah from discussing her work at Titan or sharing any information about company operations with federal investigators or anyone else. The financial terms were indeed generous, offering Sarah enough money to live comfortably while she transitioned to a new career, but the price was her silence about what she had discovered. Walsh added that refusing to sign the documents would put Sarah in a difficult position. She explained that the company had evidence of Sarah's unauthorized access to classified information and her communication of that information to unauthorized personnel, both of which were federal crimes that could result in lengthy prison sentences. They were essentially offering Sarah a choice between comfortable retirement and federal prosecution. Sarah looked around the room at the 5 executives who were waiting for her response. These were people she had worked with for over a year, people who had praised her dedication and professionalism, people who were now calmly threatening her with imprisonment if she didn't agree to cover up what appeared to be a massive espionage operation. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that her military service, which had been dedicated to protecting American interests against foreign threats, had led her to this moment where she was being threatened by Americans who were apparently working for those same foreign interests. The values and training that had made her a Navy SEAL were now being tested by fellow citizens who had abandoned those values in pursuit of money and power. Sarah's response came without hesitation, drawing on every lesson she had learned about moral courage during her military service. "I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic," she said. "That oath didn't expire when I left active duty." She stood up from the table and looked directly at Chen. "I won't sign your resignation letter, and I won't sign your non-disclosure agreement. What you're doing here is treason, and I won't be part of covering it up." The room fell silent as Sarah's words hung in the air. She had just declared war on a conspiracy that had taken years to construct and that involved millions of dollars and potentially dozens of participants. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing opponents who had demonstrated their willingness to commit federal crimes to achieve their objectives. Kane reached into his jacket and Sarah's combat instincts immediately kicked in. Her body tensed as she prepared to defend herself, but Kane only pulled out his cell phone. "I need to make a call," he said, his voice carrying an ominous tone that suggested Sarah's refusal to cooperate had triggered some kind of contingency plan. Chen's demeanor changed completely as he realized that Sarah couldn't be bought or intimidated into silence. "You've made a serious mistake," he told her. "You have no idea what you're interfering with or who you're making enemies of. This operation is bigger than you can imagine, and the people behind it won't hesitate to protect their investments." Morrison gestured toward the door. "I think this meeting is over," he said. "Security will escort you out of the building. Your access to company systems and facilities is terminated effective immediately." As Sarah walked toward the door, Walsh called out one final threat: "You should remember that federal investigations take years to complete, and a lot can happen to people who pose ongoing security risks during that time. You might want to reconsider your position while you still can." Sarah turned back to face the 5 executives who had just revealed themselves as enemy agents. "I've faced worse threats from better enemies," she said. "And I'm still here." As Sarah left the conference room, she knew that she had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The comfortable facade of corporate employment was over, and she was now fully engaged in a battle that would test every skill she had learned as a Navy SEAL. The only difference was that this battle would be fought in courtrooms and congressional hearing rooms rather than in foreign deserts and mountains. But Sarah had been trained for battles like this, and she was ready for whatever came next. Walking out of the Titan Defense Solutions building for the last time, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of transitioning from a planning phase to active operations. Her SEAL training had taught her to compartmentalize emotions and focus on immediate tactical requirements, skills that were now proving invaluable as she processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. Sarah's first priority was her personal security. The threats made during the meeting weren't idle posturing. The people she had just confronted had demonstrated their willingness to commit federal crimes and had access to resources that could make her life extremely dangerous. She needed to assume that she was now under active surveillance and that her normal routines and communication methods had been compromised. Using a secure communication protocol that Rodriguez had established, Sarah sent a coded message indicating that her cover had been blown and that she needed immediate extraction. Within hours, she received instructions to proceed to a safe house location where federal investigators were waiting to debrief her and plan the next phase of the operation. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a suburban area outside the city, staffed by FBI agents who specialized in counterintelligence operations. Sarah was greeted by Agent Jennifer Park, a veteran investigator who had spent 15 years working cases involving foreign intelligence services and defense contractor security breaches. Park's team had been monitoring Titan Defense Solutions for several weeks based on Sarah's initial intelligence reports, but they hadn't been prepared to move as quickly as Sarah's exposure had forced them to. The original plan had called for several more months of investigation to fully map the scope of the espionage network and identify all participants before taking action. Sarah's forced extraction meant that the investigation would now have to proceed without the benefit of an inside source, but the evidence she had gathered was substantial enough to support immediate action against the company and its leadership. Park's team had already obtained federal warrants to seize Titan's computer systems and financial records, and arrests of key personnel were scheduled for the following morning. The challenge was protecting Sarah during the period when Titan's leadership would be desperate to prevent her from testifying. Park explained that foreign intelligence services had a history of taking extreme measures to protect valuable assets, and Sarah's testimony could potentially expose an espionage operation that had taken years to develop and had cost millions of dollars to implement. Park's team had developed a comprehensive security plan that would keep Sarah in protective custody until the immediate danger passed, but they also needed her to remain actively involved in the investigation. Her military expertise and inside knowledge of Titan's operations would be crucial for understanding the full scope of the conspiracy and identifying all participants. Over the next 72 hours, Sarah worked closely with federal investigators to analyze the evidence she had gathered and prepare for the coordinated operation against Titan Defense Solutions. Her detailed knowledge of company personnel, computer systems, and security protocols was invaluable for planning the raids and ensuring that critical evidence wouldn't be destroyed before it could be secured. The operation began before dawn on a Tuesday morning with simultaneous raids on Titan's corporate headquarters, data center facilities, and the homes of 7 key employees including CEO David Chen. Sarah monitored the operation from the FBI field office, watching through surveillance feeds as federal agents executed search warrants and arrested suspects. The raids were more successful than investigators had dared to hope. Titan's security team had prepared protocols for destroying evidence in case of law enforcement action, but the speed and coordination of the federal operation prevented most of their contingency plans from being implemented. Agents seized thousands of documents, dozens of computer servers, and financial records that detailed the company's true operations. Chen and 4 other executives were arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit espionage, violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and money laundering. The evidence seized during the raids supported additional charges including bribery of federal officials and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Perhaps most significantly, the investigation revealed that Titan Defense Solutions was just one component of a much larger espionage network that included companies in several other countries. The Foreign Intelligence Service behind the operation had apparently been implementing a long-term strategy to penetrate American defense contracting by creating or co-opting legitimate businesses that could legally obtain classified information. Sarah's testimony before a federal grand jury was a crucial element in the prosecution's case. She was able to provide detailed first-hand accounts of the company's illegal activities and explain how her military training had enabled her to recognize patterns that civilian investigators might have missed. Her credibility as a decorated Navy SEAL gave weight to testimony that might otherwise have been dismissed as the speculation of a disgruntled employee. The legal proceedings stretched over nearly 2 years as federal prosecutors worked to unravel the full scope of the conspiracy and build cases against all participants. Sarah remained in protective custody for the first 6 months, until the most immediate threats to her safety had been neutralized through arrests and plea agreements. During this period, Sarah struggled with the psychological challenges of transitioning from an active military career to life as a protected witness. The isolation and uncertainty were difficult for someone accustomed to the camaraderie and clear mission focus of special operations. She found herself dealing with anxiety and depression that were common among veterans but were exacerbated by the unique circumstances of her situation. Park and her team arranged for Sarah to work with a psychologist who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD and other service-related mental health issues. Dr. Michael Torres had extensive experience helping special operations personnel transition to civilian life, and he understood the particular challenges faced by someone who had been forced to maintain deep cover while investigating a national security threat. Dr. Torres helped Sarah process the complex emotions surrounding her experience at Titan Defense Solutions. She had spent over a year working closely with people who turned out to be enemy agents, and the betrayal of trust involved in that relationship was psychologically damaging in ways that were difficult to quantify. Sarah had to confront the reality that her judgment and instincts, which she had relied on throughout her military career, had been manipulated by sophisticated adversaries. The therapeutic process was complicated by the fact that Sarah couldn't discuss many details of her experience due to ongoing legal proceedings and classification restrictions. Dr. Torres had the necessary security clearances to understand the general nature of what Sarah had experienced, but many specific details had to remain confidential, limiting the depth of treatment that was possible. As the legal case progressed, Sarah began to think about her future beyond the role of protected witness and star prosecution witness. The publicity surrounding the case had made her a recognizable figure in national security circles, which presented both opportunities and challenges for resuming a normal career. Defense contractors were hesitant to hire someone whose previous employment had resulted in federal investigations, but government agencies and congressional committees were interested in her expertise. Sarah received offers to work as a consultant for the Department of Homeland Security and the Government Accountability Office, both of which were developing new protocols for vetting defense contractors and preventing similar security breaches. She was also approached by several members of Congress who were interested in her perspective on defense contracting oversight and veterans transition issues. The trial of Titan Defense Solutions leadership began 18 months after Sarah's extraction from the company. The prosecution's case was built around the evidence seized during the raids and Sarah's first-hand testimony about the company's operations. Defense attorneys attempted to portray Sarah as a disgruntled employee who had misinterpreted legitimate business activities, but the documentary evidence was too overwhelming to support that narrative. Sarah's testimony lasted 3 days and covered everything from her initial suspicions about the company's operations to the final confrontation in the executive conference room. She explained how her military training had enabled her to recognize intelligence gathering patterns and how her investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic espionage activities. The defense team's cross-examination focused on Sarah's motives and methods, attempting to suggest that she had violated company policies and potentially federal law in conducting her investigation. Sarah acknowledged that she had accessed information outside her normal scope of responsibility but explained that her actions were motivated by legitimate national security concerns and were conducted in coordination with federal investigators. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges against the 5 defendants. Chen received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison, while the other executives received sentences ranging from 12 to 18 years. The convictions sent a strong message to the defense contracting industry about the consequences of participating in espionage activities. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy was widely praised by law enforcement officials and national security experts, but the publicity also made her a target for criticism from some quarters. Foreign governments and their sympathizers portrayed her as a spy and traitor, while some veterans groups questioned whether she had violated principles of loyalty and discretion that were important to military culture. The criticism was difficult for Sarah to process, particularly when it came from fellow veterans who seemed to misunderstand the nature of her actions. She had to remind herself repeatedly that her oath to defend the Constitution took precedence over loyalty to any particular employer or organization, and that exposing espionage activities was fundamentally different from betraying legitimate secrets. As the immediate aftermath of the trial began to settle, Sarah found herself facing the challenge of rebuilding her life and career in a context that had been fundamentally changed by her experience. She was no longer just a veteran transitioning to civilian employment, she was a public figure whose actions had exposed a major national security threat and whose expertise was now sought after by government agencies and private organizations. The experience had also changed Sarah's understanding of the threats facing American national security. Her military service had focused on external enemies and traditional warfare, but her experience at Titan had revealed the extent to which domestic institutions could be co-opted by foreign adversaries. The battle lines in modern conflicts were often drawn not between uniformed armies but between those who upheld democratic values and those who were willing to betray them for personal gain. Sarah realized that her fight against the espionage network was just one battle in a larger war that would require ongoing vigilance and commitment from people who understood both the value of democratic institutions and the sophisticated methods that adversaries used to attack them. Her unique combination of military training and investigative experience positioned her to play a continuing role in that fight, but it would require her to remain in a very public role that carried significant personal risks. 2 years after the conviction of Titan Defense Solutions leadership, Sarah found herself in another conference room, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. She was testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee about reforms needed in defense contractor oversight, speaking to senators and committee staff who hung on every word as she described the vulnerability she had identified in the current system. The hearing room was packed with reporters, national security experts, and representatives from defense contracting companies who were all trying to understand the implications of Sarah's recommendations. Her testimony was being broadcast live on C-SPAN and would likely influence legislation that was already making its way through Congress to strengthen security requirements for companies handling classified government contracts. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chair, had opened the hearing by praising Sarah's courage in exposing the espionage network and emphasizing the importance of her insights for preventing similar security breaches in the future. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, "your actions have potentially prevented incalculable damage to our national security, and your recommendations could help protect our country for generations to come." Sarah's prepared testimony outlined a comprehensive series of reforms that addressed the weaknesses she had identified during her investigation of Titan Defense Solutions. Her recommendations included enhanced background investigations for defense contractor employees, improved monitoring of information access and transmission, regular security audits conducted by independent investigators, and stronger penalties for companies that violated security protocols. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah advocated for the creation of whistleblower protection programs specifically designed for defense contractor employees who identified potential security threats. She explained that the current system provided inadequate protection for employees who reported suspicious activities and that fear of retaliation prevented many potential witnesses from coming forward with information about security breaches. The questioning that followed Sarah's prepared testimony revealed the depth of congressional concern about defense contractor security issues. Senator Robert Mason asked Sarah to explain how foreign intelligence services were adapting their methods to take advantage of the increasing reliance on private contractors for sensitive government functions. Sarah's response drew on both her military experience and her investigation of Titan to explain how adversaries were shifting from traditional espionage methods toward long-term infiltration of legitimate institutions. "The threat has evolved," she told the committee. "Instead of trying to steal information through hacking or recruiting individual spies, hostile governments are now creating entire companies that can legally obtain classified information over years or decades." Senator Lisa Chen wanted to understand how Sarah's military training had enabled her to identify patterns that civilian investigators might have missed. Sarah explained that special operations personnel were trained to analyze complex environments for threats and opportunities, skills that were directly applicable to identifying suspicious corporate activities. "In Afghanistan or Iraq, we learned to look for patterns that indicated enemy activity," Sarah said. "The same analytical approach works in a corporate environment. You look for inconsistencies between stated objectives and actual behavior, you track the flow of information and resources, and you pay attention to relationships that don't make obvious sense." The most challenging questions came from Senator David Park, who pressed Sarah about the ethical implications of her investigation methods. He wanted to know whether she believed employees had the right to conduct unauthorized investigations of their employers and whether her actions might set a precedent that could be abused by disgruntled workers or foreign agents posing as whistleblowers. Sarah's response was measured and thoughtful, acknowledging the legitimate concerns about employee conduct while emphasizing the unique circumstances she had faced. "I understand the concerns about employees overstepping their boundaries," she said. "But we also have to recognize that when national security is at stake, individuals have a moral obligation to act even when institutional channels aren't available or have been compromised." She explained that her decision to investigate Titan had been based on specific indicators of potential espionage activity and that she had worked closely with federal investigators to ensure that her actions were conducted within legal and ethical boundaries. "This wasn't about personal grievances or workplace disputes," she said. "This was about protecting classified information that could be used to harm American military personnel and national security interests." The hearing generated significant media coverage and public discussion about the balance between corporate security and national security oversight. Editorial writers and national security experts praised Sarah's recommendations while defense industry representatives expressed concerns about the potential costs and administrative burden of implementing enhanced security requirements. Sarah's public profile continued to grow as she accepted speaking engagements at military academies, veteran organizations, and corporate security conferences. Her presentations typically focused on leadership lessons learned during her military service and the importance of maintaining ethical standards under pressure. She avoided discussing specific details of the Titan investigation but used the general experience to illustrate broader points about moral courage and institutional responsibility. The speaking circuit provided Sarah with a platform to advocate for issues that were important to her, particularly veterans' transition assistance and women in military service. Her unique background as a female Navy SEAL gave her credibility on gender integration issues, while her successful transition to civilian employment, despite the unusual circumstances, made her a sought-after speaker on veteran career development topics. Sarah also began working on a book about her experiences, though the project was complicated by classification restrictions and ongoing legal proceedings related to the Titan investigation. She worked closely with Pentagon public affairs officers and FBI representatives to ensure that her manuscript didn't inadvertently reveal information that could compromise other investigations or intelligence sources. The writing process was therapeutic for Sarah, providing an opportunity to process her experiences and reflect on the lessons learned from her unique career path. She found that organizing her thoughts for public consumption helped her understand how the various phases of her life had prepared her for the challenges she ultimately faced at Titan Defense Solutions. One of the most significant developments in Sarah's post-Titan career was her appointment to the Defense Science Board, an advisory panel that provides independent advice to the Secretary of Defense on scientific and technical matters related to national security. The appointment was controversial in some circles, with critics arguing that Sarah lacked the traditional academic or industry credentials typically expected for such positions. However, Sarah's supporters argued that her unique combination of operational experience and counterintelligence knowledge provided perspectives that were unavailable from conventional academic or industry experts. Her appointment was ultimately confirmed after extensive background investigations and congressional hearings that focused on her qualifications and potential contributions. Sarah's work on the Defense Science Board involved reviewing emerging technologies and assessing their implications for national security. Her military background was particularly valuable for understanding how new capabilities might be employed in operational environments and what vulnerabilities they might create for American forces. The position also allowed Sarah to influence policy discussions about defense contractor oversight and security protocols. She advocated for approaches that balanced the need for innovation and efficiency with requirements for protecting classified information and preventing foreign infiltration of defense industries. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah's role on the Defense Science Board provided her with a platform for mentoring younger military officers and civilian analysts who were grappling with similar challenges in their own careers. She made a point of being accessible to women in particular who were navigating the complexities of military or national security careers. Sarah's mentoring efforts extended beyond formal professional relationships to include work with veteran organizations and military family support groups. She understood that her visibility as a successful female veteran carried responsibilities for helping others who might face similar challenges in their transitions to civilian careers. The impact of Sarah's actions continued to ripple through the defense contracting industry years after the Titan convictions. The reforms she had recommended were gradually implemented through new regulations and congressional oversight requirements, making it significantly more difficult for foreign intelligence services to penetrate American defense contractors. More broadly, Sarah's story became part of the larger narrative about post-9/11 veterans and their contributions to American society beyond their military service. Her experience illustrated how the skills and values developed through military service could be applied to civilian challenges that were just as important as traditional military missions. Sarah's legacy was still being written as she continued her work in national security and veteran advocacy, but her impact was already clear in the lives of the people she had protected through her investigation of Titan Defense Solutions. Military personnel serving in classified positions around the world were safer because Sarah had been willing to risk her career and personal safety to expose an espionage network. The broader lesson of Sarah's story was about the importance of moral courage and institutional responsibility in a complex world where traditional threats were constantly evolving. Her experience demonstrated that protecting American values and interests sometimes required individuals to act independently when institutional channels were inadequate or compromised. For Sarah personally, the experience had transformed her understanding of service and duty. Her military oath to support and defend the Constitution had not expired when she left active duty. it had evolved into a lifelong commitment that could take many different forms depending on the challenges that arose. Whether in uniform or in civilian clothes, in foreign countries or corporate conference rooms, the fundamental obligation remained the same: to protect and serve the democratic values that defined American society. As Sarah looked toward the future, she knew that new threats would emerge and that new forms of service would be required to address them. Her experience had prepared her for that reality and had given her the platform and credibility needed to continue making meaningful contributions to national security and veteran welfare. The battle against foreign infiltration of American institutions was ongoing, and Sarah was ready to continue fighting it in whatever capacity circumstances required. The young woman from Nebraska who had wanted to prove herself worthy of serving alongside America's elite warriors had accomplished far more than she had ever imagined possible. In the process, she had redefined what it meant to be a warrior in the modern world and had demonstrated that the most important battles were often fought not with weapons but with moral courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to democratic values.